Today we're bringing this tiny sparrow to life using pan pastels and pastel pencils. I'm working on Clairefontaine pastel matte paper, which is my go-to surface because it holds a lot of layers and lets you get really smooth blends without creating a dusty mess. This sparrow is sitting on some pavement, so I'm going to start creating that texture by dabbing the pan pastel in tiny dots. This creates a grainy look that's perfect for things like stone or pavers. I keep my darker values around the edges and the corners of the drawing, and the lighter values a bit closer to the bird itself. And this is a great way to draw that attention right to the main subject. Once that first layer of the background is down, I blend it with some cotton tips using gentle circular motions. You don't need to press too hard here, we're just smoothing out the colours so that they blend together subtly and look a little less harsh. Blending like this will also help push the pastel into the paper a little bit more so that you're able to build up your layers and come back later with more details. Now moving on to the base layer of the sparrow. Because this drawing is quite small, I'm using the tip and the edges of the soft tool to begin adding the base layer with pan pastels. And I'm blocking in those darkest areas first, like the feathers that are underneath the beak and around the eye area. Make sure to follow the direction of the feathers because these strokes may show through in the end result, which adds to the texture of the feathers. You want to be able to see a lot of that paper colour showing through after you've added your colours in this base layer, because leaving a little bit more of that paper texture is going to allow you to be able to add more layers on top. If you add too much pastel too soon, you'll struggle to get those essential details at the end. For the lighter coloured feathers, I switched to creamy and grey tones, again keeping my strokes in the direction of the feather growth. This kind of layering will create that fluffy, soft look. And don't worry if you don't get every feather perfect, as long as the general shape and size and direction is similar to the reference photo, it's not going to matter if they are slightly different or if you miss a few feathers or add in a few more feathers by mistake. So now that I've got my base layer down, I'm bringing in my pastel pencils for the details. I'm going to refine the texture of that pavement by stippling, which is basically just tapping the pencil to create little dots. I sharpen my pencils with a craft knife or a blade, and if I need a very sharp point, which is pretty rare, I'll use sandpaper just to get that sharper point. For this piece specifically, I do use the sandpaper quite a bit to get a bit of a finer point because of how small it is, but in general I don't use the sandpaper too much for my other projects. With the pastel pencils, I'm beginning to define the edges of the feathers and also the beak and especially the eye area. The eye is the focal point, so I'm making sure that it has the sharpest detail and the strongest contrast. Everything else can stay a little softer so that the viewer's attention goes right to that eye. If you're the kind of person who likes to follow along step by step in real time, I've got the full version of this project in my academy. And that way you can see every part of the process from start to finish rather than just the highlights that I'm showing here on YouTube. A lot of people try to draw every single feather and it can end up looking kind of stiff and unnatural. Instead, I block in the different colours I'm seeing in the reference photo, trying to think about the feathers as random shapes rather than individual feathers, and I make sure to follow the general direction and size of the feathers. Once the general shapes and values are blocked in, I can add a little bit more texture and detail with pastel pencils. Then I glaze a little bit of pastel over the top to adjust the colours, making them look a little more accurate. Glazing is basically adding a very light layer of colour over the top of your previous layers. It should tint the colour of that area without completely losing the details underneath. This also softens any harsh edges and it makes everything look a little bit more cohesive. That little glazing technique is what gives the feathers that natural, realistic, softer look. When it comes to colour choices, don't overthink it. I often use colours that aren't in the reference photo because I believe that they make your artwork look less flat and a little bit more unique and interesting. You could paint a pink elephant and it is still going to appear realistic if your values are correct. It might just seem like the elephant is standing under some unusual pink lighting, but it will still come across as believable if your dark areas are dark enough and your light areas are light enough. If you want to learn more about pastel pencils, I share my best tips and techniques in this tutorial of a frog using the Stabilo Carbothello pastel pencils. So click on that and I'll see you over there.